in section 5.1. So you might find that today's lesson actually goes a little bit easier because you've already got a little bit of a background on this. And so first of all, tips for verifying identities. The first step is to work down the most complicated side. Now it's going to be obvious. I mean, you'll know what I say when I say the most complicated side because it's going to be the one that has the most terms. Okay, and the other side will usually be the simpler of the two. Look for the number 1 and a trig function squared, or look for 2 trig functions squared and substitute. So remember, back from section 1, you have 3 formulas, and we called these the Pythagorean identities. Okay, the most famous one, the one that you are never to forget, is sine squared plus cosine squared equals 1. And you have 2 other ones that go with that. Okay, so that's what step 2 pertains to. Step 3, rewrite everything in terms of sine and cosine. Once again, we've looked at this with section 1. And then factor something out on one side of the equation. So those are just some tips. If you get stuck, try this. And so let's go ahead and look at this first one here. Okay. Now how this is different from section 1. Section 1 would just be the left side, right? Section 1 would just be this, and it wouldn't tell you, oh, it equals cosine squared. So it's nice because they're saying this answers, this simplifies to cosine squared. Your task is to show me how it does. Okay? So now, we're going to pick the most complicated side, which obviously is the left side. Okay? Most complicated side. And so now, we're going to go through the tips. And so this tip you're going to look for is a trig function squared and the number 1. So I'm going to look to see, is there something that I can substitute for this? So go back in your Pythagorean identities. What does cosecant squared minus 1 equal? Does it equal what Caleb said? Does it equal cotangent squared? Okay, so now I know that cotangent squared over cosecant squared, I now need to show that that equals cosine squared x. So now in this next step, and this is the process you need to follow, you need to put equals cosine squared x on every line till we're done. So now in this next step, I'm going to rewrite cotangent squared x in terms of sine and cosine. What does cotangent equal?
Cosine squared.
Yep. Cosine squared over sine squared. I am also going to rewrite the fraction bar as a division sign. Okay. And then cosecant squared I know is 1 over sine squared x. Now hopefully some of you as you're writing this down are looking at it and kind of seeing we're real close right now. Real close. Because how do you divide 2 fractions? You multiply by the reciprocal. So if I multiply by sine squared x over 1, what ends up happening to your sine squareds? They cancel, and my answer is cosine squared x equals cosine squared x. Now, your last step in every one of these verifications has to be the exact same thing. Has to be this in green, okay? And we're going to put a little box, which means we've proved what we needed to prove, and we're done. This is like an essay question, which means I'm looking at the whole problem. I don't care that you got down to cosine squared equals cosine squared if you've done the problem wrong. So I am looking for your steps.
Why did you change it to just cosine squared x? I mean, cotangent squared x on the top.
Because that's the first step. I mean, that had a trig function squared in the number 1. That was one of those tips. That's one of those identities, yep. Okay, let's look at another one. Secant squared theta times cotangent squared theta minus 1 equals cotangent squared. So first step, pick the most complicated side, the left side. So now if I look at it, do I have just one trig function squared in the number 1? Nope. Do I have just 2 trig functions squared? Nope. So then my next option is to write everything in terms of sine and cosine. So I know that secant squared is 1 over cosine squared. Good. So 1 over cosine squared theta. I already know that cotangent squared from the problem before is cosine squared over sine squared. And that's going to equal cotangent squared theta. What can you do now? Cancel. So it leaves me with 1 over sine squared theta minus 1 equals cotangent squared theta. Now there's actually 2 different paths you can take right now. Okay, there's one that's a little shorter, there's one that's a little longer. I think I'm going to opt for the shorter one here. I know that 1 over sine is what? Cosecant. So then now if I look at my left side, I have a trig function squared and the number 1. So I'm going to see if cosecant squared minus 1 equals something. And what is cosecant squared? That equals cotangent squared. And there you go. That is one way. The other way you could have done from this blue step, this dark blue step, is you could have gotten a common denominator between those two, which would have been sine squared over sine squared. In which case, then you would have had to combine numerators. It would have taken you about 2 more steps, but you could have gotten there as well. Okay, so once again, there's numerous ways you can do these. And your task is just going to be to find one. All right, this is the last one we're going to look at today, and then I'm going to give you a worksheet to do. Let's see. So we have secant times cosecant times tangent minus 1, and that's going to equal tangent squared, and that's the Greek letter alpha. Okay, it's just like an egg, kind of like a fish. Okay. So it is an alpha, it's just kind of like the fish there. So what do you think we're going to do here?
Convert.
Yep, convert. So what do we have? 1 over cosine times 1 over sine times minus 1, and that's going to equal tangent squared, alpha. I don't know, do they? Sines cancel, and that leaves me with 1 over cosine squared. Okay, once again, at this junction, there are 2 different ways you can solve this problem. Okay, the first way is to get a common denominator. It's going to take a few more steps, but it'll get there. The second way is to substitute in for 1 over cosine. What does that equal? That equals secant squared. Okay, so now on the left side, you should see you've got a trig function squared and the number 1. So you automatically look to see if you can substitute. What is secant squared minus 1? Ah, and there we go. That's exactly where we needed to go. Okay. Now, for today, I actually have a worksheet for you to complete. Okay, just in case you're watching the video and you don't have that worksheet, it is on the website. All right, so that is what we're going to do today. We'll continue with this probably a little bit more tomorrow. We'll do a few more problems, and then we'll continue with it Monday as well. Okay, so let's go ahead.